Okay, so yes, I wanted to talk about part of the research that I'm doing within the Pop Rebel project. It is a research within the work package 3 on cultural dimensions of populism, on different issues related to identity construction, to various cultural narratives that accompany this populist project, if we may put it that way. So for this specific presentation, I would like to think about the framing of the right-wing narrative in Poland as a right-wing counter-revolution. I think it's quite a visible sort of narrative that emerged in various speeches of politicians of the right wing in Poland, and I think it is gaining relevance, and I will try to illustrate it with examples based on the analysis of Polish right-wing weekly magazines, specifically the magazine covers. We have created quite a large database of such magazine covers. And here I wanted to thank our research assistant, Michał Płaza, who I believe is also here with us today, for his great help in helping to collect all this material. And I would like to focus on the covers from 2020. On the one hand, because these are quite recent materials, and they also show us kind of the more up-to-date let's say condition of this narrative, but also because for many reasons that year has been fairly eventful. So if we look at some of the statements from right-wing politicians, if we take Patryk Jaki, who is currently serving as MEP from the Law and Justice Party, he recently said that Poland must spearhead a cultural counter-revolution. So this is a slight change from the initial narrative of introducing good change, which seemed sort of less dramatic in its sort of meaning. There was obviously this kind of idea of refashioning or proposing a different kind of order, a different kind of system in this proposition that Law and Justice has been repeating for some time. This proposition of a fourth republic as opposed to the third republic, which has been in place. This kind of a radical change of status quo, of a rejection of the liberal values that have accompanied Poland since 1989 and since the fall of communism. So we can see this kind of a rupture, but it seems to me, when analyzing these right-wing narratives, that it is now becoming a more heated or more sort of violent even way of constructing this concept of change as a counter-revolution. If we look at Jarosław Kaczyński and his quote from a speech that he did in Bielsko-Biała, I think it tells us a lot about what this counter-revolution is about. So he phrases it as a counter-revolution against a revolution of worldview. So that revolution, according to Kaczyński, takes place in the broader European dimension. And he says that it is a revolution that furiously fights with Christianity. It is a revolution that attacks the basis of social life and the basis of the basis, namely the family. Nowadays, it is said that there is more than two sexes, that we have not only women and men. Some say that we have 80-something sexes, other that 50-something. This is debated. I already got lost. this revolution hits the basis of human identity, and the opposition supports it. So we see this strong emphasis on the language that tells us that we are in fact at war or in a field of struggle, because we see that it's a revolution that furiously fights, that attacks, that hits the basis. Yes, and in our project, we use the concept of neo-traditionalism as central to this right-wing agenda, in which particularly values related to religion, to a patriarchal model of a family, to heteronormativity, to a very different conservative values. So we can see that already in this one quote, several such elements have been mentioned. If we look at this concept of counter-revolution, to give it a little bit of a more theoretical background, it is worth wondering which revolution do the right wing really want to counter? Because we can think of sort of a illiberal turn that has been quite extensively written about in Central and Eastern Europe. So a revolution or a backlash to liberal values. We can also think of it as a conservative backlash against a revolution in cultural values, which we could sort of date back to 1968, the sexual revolution, a sort of a change of thinking in the Western world more generally. And I'm referring here to Engelhardt and Norris's book on backlash. And also we can think about it as a counter-revolution in the way that, for instance, Jan Zielonka put it, as a backlash against liberal post-Cold War, post-1989 Europe. So just to quote Zielonka here, the right-wing populists all have one thing in common. They are against the order installed after the 1989 revolution. And not only the elites that have installed that order, but also the key political projects, the European integration, constitutional liberalism, neoliberal economics, and so on. And another element that I wanted to mention here, which I think is quite relevant if we think of this whole media landscape, opinion media landscape in Poland that I'm focusing on, is that this counter-revolution, if we use that term, has been backed by development of an illiberal civil society. So there's a lot of funding that goes into various foundations, associations that promote these kind of right-wing narratives. And of course, the magazines that I am looking at also benefit from such funding and from such a sort of network of support. So this kind of environment that is created, I think, is quite relevant here. And I'm focusing on 3 weekly magazines, Sieci do Rzeczy and Gazeta Polska. Gazeta Polska is the oldest one, established in 1993, and Sieci and do Rzeczy were established respectively in 2012 and 2013. But I think the context of the establishment of these magazines is also relevant, in the sense that it was a sort of a splinter group of journalists that called themselves Niepokorni, so these kind of rebellious, independent journalists that have left the liberal media to start their own sort of media projects, and were, of course, and still are quite close to the main leaders of the broader united right coalition that is in power in Poland since 2015. Of course, their sales are not extremely high, but they're still some of the most popular weeklies in Poland. Sieci is the fourth most popular weekly, so we can see that they did gain quite a considerable group of readers. And here for this specific research, I have selected the covers from 2020 in total. This is 155 covers, and I have coded them with different keywords falling into three main themes related to the Catholic Church, to women's rights, and to the LGBT groups. So, so this seemed to show the most sort of highly debated issues, or the Polish culture wars, if we use this term. So, so as it is to be expected, the Catholic Church features primarily as the attacked fortress of Polishness. So it is frequently shown as a victim, as a sort of a center of conservative values. However, there are, of course, some internal differences as well. Sometimes the Church of John Paul II is shown as kind of opposite to the church of the current Pope Francis. John Paul II obviously features as well quite often on these covers, and here I wanted to show you one of the covers that features apologies, the Pope, the former Pope John Paul II, as attacked. You can see the lightning signs that symbolize the feminists taking part in women's protests, and we can see that the global elites and local feminists are accused of trying to kill our Pope again. Kill again refers to an attack that has been made at the Pope John Paul II when he was serving in this position. We can also see that there are other groups that attack the church supposedly. They are called the Vandals, who are sponsored by external forces, by the international LGBT movement. These references appear quite frequently as well. And they defile religious and national symbols. Here we see a group of activists who put a rainbow flag on the figure of the Christ with the cross, and this has caused quite a lot of controversy. However, rather than seeing it as just a happening, just sort of isolated event, this event has been framed as sponsored from the mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, who's been called here the patron of the blasphemy or of the profanation of this site. If we look at the second theme of women feminists, women's protests, as we know, following the Constitutional Tribunal ruling restricting the right to abortion in the fall of 2020, this has caused, of course, large-scale protests, and this has also featured very prominently in the magazine covers. Apologies, I'm losing my voice. Sorry, too much teaching, I guess. So this event has been shown as a dangerous revolt. Sorry. The feminists were shown as those who attacked the church, even though, of course, it wasn't really the church that was attacked. It was a protest against the ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal. Even the language refers to the revolt of feminists. The women who participate in the protests are shown as aggressive, enraged, politically motivated activists, sorry. And we can see that they are shown as the ones attacking the police rather than the other way around. We've seen quite brutal ways to control the protests. And we see that the protesters are shown as being in conspiracy with liberal elites to overthrow the government. So the cover on the right shows this quite clearly, with Marta Lempart, one of the leaders of the strike, shown together with Rafał Trzaskowski, with Szymon Hołownia and Donald Tusk. And you can see these quite expressive elements, these hands reaching for the state, for the government, saying that it's a putsch against the government. It's a kind of attempt to overthrow the government. Sorry. And since it is a pandemic year, we can see this context of COVID appearing in line with the protests. So the protests have been inscribed in this narrative that they are the reason for the second wave of COVID to appear. Indeed, we can see the title on the cover of the left. The women protesters are called the sowers of death. So those who are responsible for the spread of COVID, even though we can see that everyone is wearing masks, and as much as possible, precautions were taken to sort of limit the spread of COVID. We can also see here an image that is related, perhaps not so well visible, on the small picture of the cover of Gazeta Polska, that we see the protesters, we see Marta Lempart with a loudspeaker, and on the top right corner there is a man with a cross. So again, we see this clash of values very that is referred to here. There is also again this hint at a sort of a liberal conspiracy, let's say, or sort of a support, mutual support given, because we see Marta Lempart and the leaders of the opposition parties shown together and blamed for spreading the disease in death. So this language of spreading death, spreading disease, is also bringing us to this opposition that is often used in the right-wing narratives between the civilization of death, so those who support access to abortion, for instance, and the civilization of life, which are shown as opposite values. Sorry. Another interesting strand of this narrative is the focus on showing women as manipulated by some kind of cosmopolitan leftist post-communist elites who corrupt the Polish society. And we see three famous intellectuals, Agnieszka Holland, Olga Tokarczuk, and Krystyna Janda, who supposedly are trying to create Poles anew. So we have this this hint that this is some kind of a project of social engineering, perhaps, of moral corruption on the other hand. And then the leaders of the left are shown in this kind of very socialist, realist aesthetic, with a title, "All Power in the Hands of Feminists," reminding us of the all power to the Soviets, right? And the subtitle, "From Red Moscow to Rainbow Brussels." So again, we see this kind of an attempt to cluster feminism, LGBT rights, communism, neo-Marxism. There's another cover which I didn't show here that talks about a neo-Marxist offensive. And the third kind of strand of the research that I wanted to share here is a strong emphasis, and probably this was the most featured, the most frequently featured topic, either as a central topic or as a side topic on the covers of that year. It is the rainbow threat, or the rainbow enemy at the gates, as I have called it. Of course, this anti-LGBT campaign that has started earlier and has featured in the right-wing narratives already at several points of time, has intensified at the time of presidential elections in spring 2020 that were, of course, quite problematic for the reason of the pandemic. But this is beside the point here, and I think it was reflected also in the words of the president, the incumbent president, who eventually won the election for his second term, Andrzej Duda, who said that it is not people, it is an ideology. So we could see that this has kind of triggered the right-wing media to emphasize this idea of LGBT rights as an ideology. And we can see that this fixed expression of LGBT ideology has been repeated over and over on the covers, of course, in the articles inside those magazines as well. And we can see that Rafał Trzaskowski, the main competition for Andrzej Duda, has been presented as an ally of the LGBT movement, of this LGBT ideology, supposedly, and he is referred to as Rainbow Rafał, candidate out of an equality parade, a patron of profanity, as we have seen earlier, and an extremist candidate. So you can see in particular on the right side the image of Rafał Trzaskowski with a rainbow band on his shoulder and an Antifa sign on the other side. Well, some fire, some well, I guess aggressive protesters in the background, but also some money, some 100 zloty bills. So we can see that this is also a hint to the fact that this is a sponsored phenomenon. And we can see again here a certain radicalization, because initially this homophobic anti-LGBT discourse would mention homosexuality or transsexuality as disease, as perversion. Famously, the Archbishop of Krakow called it a rainbow disease. Now, in these recent discourses, we can see an emphasis on the rainbow threat. So there is more emphasis on the fact that this is some kind of a danger, some kind of a threat. This is some kind of an aggressive movement. So we can see that LGBT lies are mentioned, LGBT ideology madness, LGBT provocations, rainbow militias, as you can see on the right. There is this kind of depiction of supposedly people who would be violent or dangerous. This threat is not only internal, but it's also foreign. A rainbow ram from Washington was mentioned after the victory of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And the EU LGBT strategy as an attack on the family. So again, Brussels, rainbow Brussels, rainbow West, as an ally of this dangerous LGBT ideology. we can see that this international dimension that I think Joanna will be talking about soon is also featuring quite prominently. We have a cover here in which we see Ursula von der Leyen and Jarosław Kaczyński. For some reason, between them there is a lightning that is a symbol of the women protest of Strajk Kobiet, the women's strike, which has rainbow colors. And the title is "The Union has to be told stop. Polexit, we have a right to talk about it." There's also a cover that Poland will not be a colony. So we can see this clash of values as somehow historical or never-ending. It's always a clash between those who are subjugated and those and their struggle for independence. So in a way, we could say that we could observe here what Timothy Snyder called politics of eternity. So this kind of emphasis on things never changing, of the nation being constantly shown as a victim, shown as struggling for independence. There are always these historical enemies that are waiting to harm the nation, and the role of the leader is to defend against such attacks, supposedly. So to summarize, to conclude, we observe here that this narrative shows us a clash of good and evil. We can see on this cover Jarosław Kaczyński, who says that we will strongly defend our values. We can see that on another cover, Professor Andrzej Nowak, who also shares these kind of conservative views, says that we should form a kind of confederacy of people ready to defend tradition. And of course, on the other side, we see the fear of a neo-Marxist offensive or a leftist rebellion. And sometimes this was actually mentioned in the context of Western Europe, leftist cancer. So we can see that the threat to tradition is constructed as both internal and external, and this clash is shown almost as if it was a holy war. And if it is such, then all forms of attack are allowed if we want to defend what is sacred. So in a way, it is a legitimization of a more aggressive, more violent counter-revolution. And this counter-revolution, of course, can be inscribed in this quite typical populist strategy of showing the struggle as a sort of Manichaean struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So I think this is it from me. If you have any questions, or if you would like to find out more, I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.